The member for Solomon.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I ask leave of the House to amend notice number 3, private members' business, in the terms circulated to honourable members.
Is there any objection to leave being granted? There being no objection, leave is granted. The member for Solomon.
I move notice number 3 as amended relating to the bombing of Darwin in the terms circulated to honourable members.
The member for Solomon.
Okay. Thank you, Mr Speaker. I rise to speak to my motion, but firstly can I say that I am disappointed that Minister Snowden is now playing politics with this motion. Despite being in this place on and off since 1987 and also having been the Minister for the last 3 years, he's had ample opportunity to do something about recognising the bombing of Darwin. I've only been here for a little over 12 months, and having listened to my constituents, I have brought this motion to the floor. Despite this motion being tabled for the last 5 weeks, in my view, enough time for the Minister to contact me and talk through possible changes. It is disappointing that at the 11th hour, Minister Snowden, through his staff, proposed amendments which I felt watered down the original intention of my motion. The tabling of this motion was to fill a commitment to my community and a number of constituents who have asked that this place recognise the bombing of Darwin as a national day of significance and highlight the significant moments surrounding this event. My colleague Senator Scullion has also put on the notice paper in the other place a similar motion regarding this event so that both places can acknowledge the significance of the bombing of Darwin. My motion firstly acknowledges the 19th of February 1942 as the day Darwin was bombed, marking the first time Australia was militarily attacked by enemy forces. Secondly, reflect upon the significant loss of Australian defence personnel and civilians during the attacks and casualties of the bombings. Thirdly, recognises that the attack remained a secret for many years and that even today many Australians are unaware of the bombing of Darwin and the significant damage and loss of life which resulted. And recognise the campaign of coordinated bombing against Northern Australia involving 97 Japanese attacks from Darwin to Broome and Wyndham in the west, to Katherine in the south, to Townsville in the east over the period 1942 to November 1943. And finally, call for the 19th of February of each year to be gazetted as Bombing of Darwin Day and be named a day of national significance by the Governor-General. Since coming to this place, I've spoken a number of times on the bombing of Darwin. I've tried to raise awareness of the events commencing with the bombing of Darwin 1942 and seeking for the history of these events to be included in the national curriculum. On the 20th of June this year, when speaking on the Veterans Entitlements Amendment Bill 2011 in this very House, I asked the Government to appropriately acknowledge the bombing of Darwin as an event of national significance and, in addition, to ensure funding be provided for the commemorations for this very important event. Mr Deputy Speaker, the significance of this event and the drive to provide recognition in terms of a day of remembrance is not just the manifestation of "that would be nice" push from my office, but a representation of the sentiment of constituents within my electorate and the broader Northern Territory. Darwin is a town which owes much of its rich history to the presence of the military. A tri-military town, Darwin provides a home to personnel representing the Navy, Army and Air Force arms of our military. Pride is a word that comes to mind when discussing the military and military history with people within the Northern Territory in general. Territorians are passionate about who they are and about the history that underpins the Territory's development. This pride, Mr Deputy Speaker, includes the military and the ongoing presence of the military and how they are interwoven within the fabric that is the Northern Territory. The 19th of February is a significant date which has for many years been on the books as a date for inclusion in the Territory's calendar of important events. As an example, each year the Darwin City Council coordinates an annual commemorative service at the Darwin Cenotaph, with proceedings commencing at the exact time the very first raid occurred, 19th of February 1942. Mr Deputy Speaker, at 9:58 a.m, February 19, 1942, the true impact of a war which most Australians considered was happening across the other side of the world came to Australia. Darwin, the most northern capital city and a place few Australians at the time viewed as strategic, became a battleground. Not just a battleground, but the first site for an attack on our homeland and sovereignty. On that day, history was set. Our nation witnessed a loss of life which to this day remains one of the largest losses of life in any single national event, eclipsed only by the deaths of 645 service personnel on the HMAS Sydney in 1941 and the death of 1,050 Australians killed in the sinking of the Montego Maru, a ship carrying POWs off Rabaul in July 1942. On the 19th day of February, our nation grew up and changed forever. A member of the British Empire, our troops, along with the troops from other Commonwealth countries, were a world away fighting for survival in other places. It wasn't our pilots or our combined Commonwealth forces in the skies over Darwin fighting to protect our homeland on this day, but it was Americans. Mr Deputy Speaker, the air defences this 19th of February 1942 over Darwin remained in the hands of a small number of American Kitty Hawk fighters, the brave pilots, half of a flight which had returned to Darwin from an earlier cancelled mission had remained in the air on guard while half landed to refuel. Within Darwin Harbour, an array of ships, merchant and naval, sat at anchor, moored to wharfs or under steam, moving under the harbour environments. The numbers included the United States naval ships, the USS William B. Preston, USS Peary, and the United States Army transport ships Meigs and the Mauna Loa. At around 8:45 a.m. the morning of the 19th of February, the first wave of some 188 aircraft deployed from enemy aircraft carriers 350 kilometres northwest of Darwin, the same enemy carriers and ships which constituted the Japanese Imperial Strike Force which attacked Pearl Harbor on the 7th of December 1941, 2 months earlier. Mr Deputy Speaker, unlike the surprise attack on Pearl Harbor, the defences of Darwin, as cited in A War at Home, a comprehensive guide to the first Japanese attacks on Darwin, written by Dr. Tom Lewis, OAM, Director of the Darwin Military Museum and renowned military historian, were well prepared. 18 anti-craft gun emplacements, many machine guns and the combined weapons of 45 ships were trained on the Darwin skies. Stated by Dr. Lewis in a recent media release, around 7,000 defenders in Darwin had much to be proud about. In fact, they'd already defeated the first attempt to close off the port for the previous month. 4 80-men enemy submarines were repulsed and one of them sunk by the corvette HMAS Lorraine. The I-124 remains outside the harbour today. Mr Deputy Speaker, at 9:58 a.m. on that February day, the first 180 Strike Force aircraft commenced a bombing raid over the city of Darwin, followed by the addition of a second flight of some 54 aircraft. At the end of the attack, 9 ships, 7 within the harbour and 2 in waters north of the harbour, were on the way to the ocean floor. Almost the entire squadron of 10 Kitty Hawk fighters had been destroyed, along with 3 USN Catalina flying boats, as recorded within Allied loss sheets for the period, along with numerous other defence and civilian aircraft. Damage across the wider Darwin area was significant, with the administrator's residence, local police station, post office and numerous government offices destroyed. In terms of human loss, soon after the event, figures up to 1,000 people dead were reported. However, a figure of 251 is cited by Paul Rosenweg in his article Darwin 50 Years On, a reassessment of the first raid casualties, published in 1995, is the most convincing. Mr Deputy Speaker, of the 251 lives lost, 89 of those were American servicemen, lost with the bombing and subsequent striking of the USS Peary. Interestingly, reports through the printed press and via radio to a broader Australian public at the time were considerably reduced in comparison. It was reported on the front page of the Melbourne tabloid The Herald the day following the attack: 15 killed, 24 hurt in Darwin. The Sydney Morning Herald reported no vital damage to RAF establishment, with the total number of casualties reported as 8 killed. The government of the day chose not to release the true situation in Darwin, particularly the strategy behind the Japanese bombing raid and the importance of defending and retaining control of Australia's northern coastline. Following the attack on the 19th of February, troop numbers in Darwin and across the northern coastline were bolstered. Life in Darwin, thanks to the resilience of the Darwin population and the Aussie spirit, went on as normal. Mr Deputy Speaker, over the course of 1942 and 1943, Darwin was attacked and bombed a further 64 times. Fortunately, the loss of life remained small. Darwin was not only the site for attacks across the broader region of Australia's northern coast, with bombings occurring in Wyndham and Broome. Sadly, Mr Deputy Speaker, the events of World War II in terms of the bombing of Darwin and the northern coast had not been remembered with the significance which it should. These attacks were not random and the acts of some individual. They were acts of war perpetrated against our Australian homeland, strategic attacks by forces wishing to gain an advantage and willing to kill Australian lives to effect that purpose. Pearl Harbor only need mention for every American and a considerable proportion of the Western world to immediately conjure up images or recognise the magnitude of that one attack in December 1941. Yet, from an Australian perspective, this day should be no less significant in our own minds and that of our history. The bombing of Darwin is our own Australian Pearl Harbor, undertaken by the same Japanese Imperial Strike Force and for the same strategic advantage to enemy forces of the day. In the past 2 years, including during my pre-election activities within the Solomon electorate, when meeting with the community, returned service personnel and current serving military personnel, a significant number of people had sought to progress some form of national action designed to afford an opportunity to pay respects of remembrance, not just to the events surrounding the bombing of Darwin, but the broader bombing campaign across Australia's northern coastline. Mr Deputy Speaker, the day of 19th February recognises that very attack on the very first attack on Australian soil, a day where 10 ships were sunk, numerous defence and civil aircraft destroyed and a loss of 251 lives, including a recorded 89 on the USS Perry. This date signifies the very start of a prolonged bombing campaign undertaken by an enemy who sought to attack our homeland and sovereignty, and in my view, the date best suited for a day of remembrance. Mr Deputy Speaker, I acknowledge Dr Tom Lewis firstly for his advocacy on this issue, but also for his valued text on the history of Darwin and the significance in terms of Australian history during the Second World War. Much of my speech today is a result of the historical record generated by Dr Lewis. Australian history is not just for the historian. Dr Lewis, along with a long list of people, value the importance of our history and support the premise history should be recognised, celebrated and, most importantly, remembered by all Australians. Mr Deputy Speaker, the significance of this date is not just the remembrance of the events of World War II and the events across Northern Australia. This date signifies much more. As I stated earlier, this date reflects pride for our military and pride for our history. This date also promotes reflection for events long past, reflection on what we could have been if events of those times in World War II had turned out differently. More deeply, Mr Deputy Speaker, this date addresses a need to remember, not events specifically, but the loss of valued lives in the service of our country. In a population where a large proportion of our residents are serving military personnel engaged in support services associated with the military or our returned service personnel, remembrance of the fallen friends, mates and servicemen and women from yesterday and today is of vital importance. The 19th of February is not just a date in terms of Australian history, it is far more personal to many and far more deeply felt. Not only have we satisfactorily remembered the theatres of war or conflict our service personnel have been engaged, in truth, we as a nation at times have for many and varied reasons failed to adequately recognise some events and have not demonstrated the respect and pride deserved for those who fought. As a result, opportunities to redress the importance of recognition and remembrance are often more deeply felt. I offer this motion that the 19th day of February each year be recognised as the Bombing of Darwin Day, a day where the battle for and defence of our Northern Australia coastline and homeland commenced in World War II. I commend the motion to the House.